Welcome back to the History of Early Western Civilization. This is Professor Allen, and here is Lecture Day 12. So, we've already expanded Rome throughout the Italian peninsula when they attacked the Etruscans, or they went to war as well as assimilated the Etruscans, peacefully as well as mostly warlike. They went to war against the Samnites. They went to war against Pyrrhus of Epirus from Greece here, when he tried to help out the colony of Tarentum over on the tip of the southern peninsula here of Italy. And now Rome basically has, or the Roman Republic has, the entire Italian peninsula under their control. And during this period, they're becoming very well noticed by other powers on the areas around the Mediterranean Sea, such as the rest of Greece, which of course is, divided up between Pyrrhus's kingdom of Epirus as well as the Antigonid dynasty, which we'll talk about later. Remember, that was one of the successor kingdoms. We've got Carthage, which is kind of a thalassocracy, and we'll talk about them in a moment because they're going to be important in this lecture and the majority of this lecture. And so, as well as a few other little small tribes and things kind of scattered around the Mediterranean Sea. Ptolemy at this point, or the Ptolemaic dynasty out here, really isn't interested in Rome at this time, or vice versa, but that will change later on. And so there's going to be a lot of changes in this lecture where Rome kind of goes from this power which had mostly expanded and stayed on, or completely stayed on the Italian peninsula, to now where it becomes a Mediterranean power as well as a world power in the Mediterranean Sea area, because at this time, really the entire world, to their knowledge, was around the Mediterranean Sea. So, this lecture is going to also heavily focus on the Punic Wars. So who are the Punes? Well, there's no one called the Punes or the Punics, but there are someone called the Punicus, which is actually what the Romans called the Carthaginian people. Okay? The Carthaginians, of course, called themselves the Carthaginians, based on their city of Carthage, right here. But originally, Carthage was a Phoenician colony. We talked about the Phoenician people all the way back during basically Nebuchadnezzar and others, and beforehand when they were based here, and that they traded throughout the whole Mediterranean Sea, up around the Mediterranean Sea, out along the coast of Spain, all the way to England, the Phoenicians did. And so that was quite extraordinary for the time. Well, eventually the Phoenicians were conquered and defeated by other powers, such as Nebuchadnezzar II of the Chaldeans, and other groups after that. And so the Phoenicians kind of became very weak, but many of their colonies still existed and still continued kind of in their own ideas, and eventually developed into their own cultures. And Carthage was one of these, and actually kind of assimilated multiple of the other ones in the area. And so Carthage became very powerful between that period, during the Phoenicians' kind of fall onwards to the 200s BCE. So a very long period of time they've existed. And, of course, the Romans kind of heard about these people and interacted with them a bit. The Etruscans used to trade and have a peace treaty with the Carthaginians. Of course, that ended, when the Etruscans were defeated by Rome. But the Carthaginians have been on the scene for a while, and the Romans have known about them, but really not really cared too much about them. Well, that's going to start changing, because of several small events, which kind of gets out of hand at first, as you'll see. Again, the Punicus is just the word given to the Phoenicians by the Romans, okay? And because the Carthaginians were originally Phoenician, the Romans kind of call all the Carthaginians Punicus, okay, or Punes, or the Punics. And that leads us to where it becomes known as the Punic Wars. There will be actually 3 Punic Wars that we will cover. The first 2 are much more important than the last one. But let's get started. So, again, we've already given you a quick detail of the Carthaginians. The Carthaginians kind of began their own empire okay? And as you can see in these pink areas, they've got a relatively large area throughout the Mediterranean Sea. They are, of course, a thalassocracy, meaning that they have a very strong navy and that they use their navy for trade. And while they do have a little bit of an army, most of their actual army are mercenaries, meaning that they will hire other people to do the fighting for them, okay? And they won't just hire people from, like, Carthage itself or these places that they own. They'll hire people from the rest of North Africa, Spain, Gaul, which is France. They'll hire mercenaries that are in the phalanx from Greece. They'll go all the way to former Persia, which is now the Seleucid Empire, or the Ptolemaic Empire, and they'll in Egypt, and they'll hire people from those places as well. They'll hire anyone from anywhere, basically. Okay, and so make sure to remember that. So as you can see, Carthage kind of begins to spread out by the 265 era. By 265 BCE, and of course you've got the Antigonids here in Greece, and then the other Greek city-states such as Epirus here. You've got the Seleucid dynasty, one of the other successor kingdoms other than the Antigonids here, and you've got Egypt here with the Ptolemaic dynasty. And Rome, of course, has spread out through all of this, and over time it's starting to look to going elsewhere. And at this time, in around 265, that's exactly what it's kind of thinking about doing, is expansion. Not just over the mountains here, the Alps mountains that are up here in northern Italy, and into these areas, but possibly throughout the Mediterranean world. Well, the islands of Corsica, Sardinia, and Sicily are three major Carthaginian island territories, okay? And Rome is kind of looking at them all as very important if they want to start trading in the Mediterranean Sea themselves. Well, Rome at this time doesn't have a navy, okay, at all. It just doesn't have hardly any ships, okay, and no actual military navy, okay? It has a couple merchant vessels, and that's about it, doing a little bit of trade up and down the coast, but nothing really big military-wise. And that's going to change during the Punic Wars. Well, the island of Sicily, which we've talked about before. Remember, this was the target of Alcibiades' attack during the Peloponnesian War, okay? And the city of Syracuse was one of those Greek colonies that he planned on attacking, okay? We've talked about that already, so there's no need to go over that again. But Syracuse is an extremely important Greek colony on the southeastern part of Sicily, the island of Sicily. And as you can see, Sicily is kind of three different colors right here, where part of it is purple because it is Carthaginian owned, part of it is green, which is around the city of Syracuse, and then if you on the northern part, so the Carthage in the west, Syracuse in the southeast, and then there's this northeastern area, which isn't really colonized that too much. There's a couple Greek colonies and a couple other towns there, but nothing big. Well, a group of people from Italy, which are a Latin tribe, just like the Romans, so that they are genetically the same and have very similar ethnicity, DNA, and culture to the Romans themselves, okay, are these Latin peoples, okay, Latins are the Romans as well as these Campanians, okay, come from southern Italy over across this little bit of sliver of water between Italy itself and Sicily, okay, and they invade the northeast. They actually have the intention of invading and taking over this little area, this white area on Sicily, okay, and there's another group that are living there at this time, called the Sons of Mars, okay, the Sons of Mars, which are mercenaries. Now, remember, Carthage has a mercenary army. Now, these Sons of Mars, okay, Sons of the God of War is what they basically call themselves, okay, they're also this Latin group, okay, they're another Latin group, but they're mercenaries. They're not the same as the Campanians. And they're kind of living on Sicily at this time as well. And they see these Campanians coming, and they decide that they're just going to fight the Campanians, or fight back against the Campanians as the Campanians cross this little sliver of water over to here. And so, we've got this kind of fight breaks out between these Campanians, which are a Latin people, and the Sons of Mars, which are this mercenary group, but they're also a Latin people, fighting on the island of Sicily right here, right next to the city of Syracuse, and right next to Carthaginian-controlled Sicily. And at this point, those Sons of Mars had formerly worked with the Carthaginians, and so they kind of send a letter to Rome saying, hey, Carthage is being really mean and sending these mercenaries against us. That's not exactly true, right? The Sons of Mars, are acting alone. They're just fighting against them because they lived in this area themselves and the Campanians attacked them. Well, the Campanians are getting their butts kicked by the Sons of Mars, and so the Campanians plead to Rome for help. Especially since Syracuse decides to get involved in the fighting because they feel threatened as well. So at that point, Syracuse and the Sons of Mars are ganging up on the Campanians. The Campanians are wanting help, and so they ask Rome. They're basically what they feel is their big brother, ethnically wise, and they ask for help. And Rome actually will send an army down the Italian peninsula and cross right here over the water with their few small boats onto Syracuse, or onto Sicily itself, and send an army down towards Syracuse to tell them to kind of stop. Carthage, at this point, sees their kind of friends, the Syracusians, the people of Syracuse, as maybe being ganged up by Rome, and decide, well, we'll help Syracuse if they want help, because they kind of see a opportunity to really control the rest of, Syracuse through an alliance and then eventually take it over themselves through peaceful terms. And so Carthage jumps in. So now you've got this conflict between Rome and Carthage, which it really wasn't between Rome and Carthage at the beginning, right? And so this will lead to the outbreak of the First Punic War in 264 BCE on this island right here, for the most part. Most of the fighting during this war, during the First Punic War, is going to take place on this island, okay? And the water around the island, okay? The Mediterranean Sea, okay? And so that is the beginning of the First Punic War. So you've got Carthage and the Carthaginian Empire hanging out, and they send, fighting again, they're allied with Syracuse, and now they're fighting against the Campanians and the Romans on Syracuse as well that are beginning to go down. And so you end up having fighting breaking out, where the Syracuse people and Carthage are fighting against the Romans and the Campanians. And the Campanians kind of don't do much for the rest of the war. They help a little bit, but nothing really ever needing to mention them again. And so at this point, it's really boiling down to this big war between Rome and Carthage. And Carthage starts realizing, okay, this is very important. We need to send our best general to Sicily. And so they send their best general, and he is actually a Carthaginian. His name is Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar Barca. He is their leading general. He's basically one of their top best generals that they've ever had in military history for the Carthaginians. They regard him as a hero. They know that he is able to work with the very different groups of mercenaries very well. And that's extremely important, that when you have these bunches of different types of troops and soldiers from all over the place of the Mediterranean world, like you've got people from here, and people from here, and people from here, as well as some own Carthaginians, and then maybe some Greek soldiers as well helping out. They all have different ideas, languages, styles of fighting. Well, Hamilcar Barca has spent his career learning how to work with all of these different groups and make them this great military force and mercenary army. And so he starts leading the attacks for Carthage against the Romans on Sicily, okay? And starts doing very well against the Roman army. Again, the Roman army, of course, is these guys. We talked about these guys last time. The manipul system, where they would fight in a checkerboard formation with the little guys maybe running around with slings and slingshots and stuff out here, and javelins, and then you've got like cavalry on the sides of the army. So this is the Roman army against basically, you name it, they've got it for the Carthaginian mercenary army, okay? Different types of different things, okay? And so a professional kind of Roman army versus this kind of hodgepodge of all these mercenaries. And the Romans thought they were going to do very well. And, well, Hamilcar kind of shows them they were overestimating what they were going to be able to do, the Romans. And so that ends up ensuing. And this war is going to be a very long war. It starts in the year 264 BCE, and it's going to go all the way on to the year 241 BCE. So it's a very, very long war. This over 20 years of warfare, mostly on here, okay? Longer than some of you have been alive, this long war, okay? Which happens in war, okay? Sometimes wars happen for many, many years, okay? And so this war is very similar to those kind of long wars. Well, eventually, Rome's weak navy trying to get from ships, of course, you know, that little strait of water, as well as just Rome itself sending from here, as opposed to just here, to Sicily to send extra soldiers there. They've got to do it somehow. They can't just teleport, right? And there's no magic or land bridge or anything there. They've got to go by boat. And Rome's navy is very weak. And it's actually defeated by the Carthaginian navy. And so Rome starts realizing they need to start building a better navy. And they actually capture and find a broken Carthaginian ship in Italy, okay? They actually capture, like, this washed up on shore, broken Carthaginian ship from a storm or a battle, and they copy it. And they're like, this is a really good design of a ship. And if you look at the Carthaginian or Roman ships they were then beginning to build, they're very similar to the triremes. Remember the triremes of ancient Greece during the Battle of Salamis, okay? And so these trireme kind of style ships had that pointy metal area or spear-like area so that it would smash into the other ship on the side of it, and all the troops would kind of jump on the ship, and then there would all be the banks of rowers on the side. Well, this is very similar, but the Romans came up with this extra kind of idea on top of that called the corvus, or harpago, or harpago. Whatever you want to call it, the harpago, harpago, or the corvus, okay? And what it is corvus means beak, okay? And it's this on this pulley system, as you can see in the pictures, okay? And it's got like a rope to here, and then the rope goes through here and goes down to here to this winch, and they can lower this bridge down on it. And if you look at it, it's 4 feet wide, which is about wide enough for about 2 soldiers with their weapons to walk across it at a time next to each other. It's 36 feet long, okay? So it's quite long. It means it can go from this ship to another ship that it's rammed into, as opposed to the men just kind of hoping to jump across successfully and safely. And so this corvus is kind of like a bridge, and it has a hook on it. It has a hook on it because what they want to do is, yes, it rams into a ship here, but then this gets lowered onto the other ship like a drawbridge, and it hooks onto the other ship. And then when the other ship maybe tries to push away from it, it can't because it's hooked. And so Rome starts using this in the year 260 BCE, 3 or 4 years into the war. 3 to 4 years into the war after it had already started. They've changed their navy, they've captured this Carthaginian ship, and they come up with this idea with this corvus themselves. The Roman invent this. And they start building a huge navy. And it starts changing things big time. And so we will talk about that and the rest of the Punic War, and how the Romans start to win on the island of Sicily in the next lecture video.